Tonight on All In.
I did everything right and they indicted me.
Donald Trump's favorite judge does it again.
All of her rulings, benign or not, have gone in the direction of more delay.
Tonight, the dark implications from the latest slow walking in the stolen documents case.
This should set off alarm bells. The reality is this is thuggery.
Then, is the district that was duped by George Santos about to make a similar mistake?
Most people lie on their resumes. It's just, unfortunately, it's the reality.
Yeah, but you lied about everything.
Well, not true.
And why Fox News is sprinting away from their own anti-immigrant fear-mongering.
He's sucking concrete. These illegals think they own this street. This is our country.
What All In starts right now. Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. It was not long after that Donald Trump's home was raided by the FBI because he was illegally stashing hundreds of classified documents there, refusing to give them back, that President Joe Biden's team did a check of his own residences and found some of his own. While packing up his office at the Penn Biden Center, the president's lawyers discovered classified documents from the Obama administration, turned them over to the National Archives. The lawyers later found more documents at Biden's home in Delaware, the vast majority of them actually notes that Biden himself made. But with special counsel Jack Smith already investigating Donald Trump, Attorney General Merrick Garland, rightly I think, appointed a special counsel to investigate the Biden matter as well. Yesterday, that special counsel, a man named Robert Hur, did his best James Comey impression. He cleared the president of wrongdoing conclusively, saying in the very first sentence of his report that no criminal charges are warranted in this matter. But he went on to essentially give the president a political roughing up in a report that drips with contempt and condescension. I mean, really, you should look at the first page of this thing. Within the first few paragraphs, he paints President Biden as some sort of self-obsessed egotist for wanting to preserve documents from his life and career. I'm quoting him here. Mr. Biden has long seen himself as a historic figure. He believed his record during decades in the Senate made him worthy of the presidency. He collected papers and artifacts related to significant issues and events in his career. He used these materials to document his legacy and to cite as evidence that he was a man of presidential timber. What the hell, man? And of course, there was this stinging assessment. Again, this actually isn't an assessment. I want to be clear here. This is a hypothetical of how he thinks Biden would defend himself this trial. He says this: at trial, Mr. Biden would likely present himself to a jury, as he did during our interview of him, as a sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. Now, again, let's be clear about where this is coming from. Robert Hur is a conservative Republican, former clerk for then Chief Justice William Rehnquist, served in the Department of Justice under Donald Trump, working as a top advisor to Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. Trump then nominated him to be U.S. Attorney for the District of Maryland. And I think the reason that Hur's report struck a nerve with so many people yesterday is that it reminded them of the incalculable damage that FBI Director James Comey did back in 2016. Comey also cleared Hillary Clinton of any wrongdoing related to her handling of classified information. But, like her, he went on to share all sorts of thoughts about the Democratic presidential nominee's bad behavior with her emails. All this got me thinking about an interesting trend in our modern politics about who investigates a sitting president or presidential candidate. So 30 years ago in 1994, Kenneth Starr was appointed as independent counsel overseeing the Whitewater investigation into President Bill Clinton. Of course, Starr was a virulently partisan Republican, as his own report revealed. In fact, you may remember Starr actually returned to the political stage after a huge scandal over sexual abuse and assault at a school that he ran, to the political stage to defend Donald Trump during his first impeachment trial. So that was during Clinton. You got a Republican investigating the Democrat. Then there was George W. Bush. And there was an investigation of the public leaking of a CIA agent's identity to get back at a whistleblower who was saying that the Bush administration was lying about WMD. So the Republican president's deputy attorney general at the time, remember this guy, James Comey, chose another Bush appointee, another guy appointed by a Republican, U.S. Attorney Patrick Fitzgerald, to serve as special counsel in that case. By 2015, Republican James Comey was the FBI director. He launched a criminal investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails. Then came Donald Trump and the investigation into his campaign's dealing with Russia. Rod Rosenstein appointed Robert Mueller as special counsel. Remember that? a lifelong Republican who served in several Republican administrations, including in the Bush years. That brings us back to Republican Robert Hur. You seeing a pattern?
Starr, a Reagan Republican, is a former federal appeals judge and served as George Bush's Solicitor General.
Comey and Fitzgerald are both Bush political appointees and carry the same baggage as John Ashcroft, said Senator John Kerry of Massachusetts.
Both Robert Mueller and James Comey are lifelong Republicans. Both were high-level George W. Bush appointees.
Rob Hur is a registered Republican who served in the top ranks of President Trump's Justice Department.
So there's a clear pattern here. It's consistent, at least. Democrats get investigated by Republicans, while Republicans get investigated by Republicans. Now, we're also seeing what happens when Republicans judge Republicans. The news of the closing of Biden's classified documents case may have reminded you, as it did me, oh, right, there is still an ongoing criminal case against Donald Trump for his handling of classified documents at his retirement home in Florida. Trump faces a total of 40 felony charges in that case, including willful retention of national defense information in violation of the Espionage Act. And in fact, Special Counsel Hur was at lengths to point out the vast difference between the Biden case and this one. But that case, the criminal one pending against the guy who's going to be the Republican nominee, has kind of disappeared off the radar, in large part because who is in charge of it? District Judge Aileen Cannon, also conservative, member of the Federalist Society, appointed by Donald Trump himself. And back in 2022, Judge Cannon burst on the scene with a frankly ludicrous ruling in Trump's favor right after the FBI searched Mar-a-Lago, a decision so flagrantly wrong that the federal appeals court above her, a panel of 3 Republican nominees, unanimously reversed it in a scathing ruling. But that embarrassment has not seemed to affect Judge Cannon at all. Since she was assigned to the case last summer, Cannon has not made any effort to seem like a more fair-minded arbiter of justice. Aileen Cannon knows that Donald Trump wants to delay his trial in this matter until after the election. And she can make that happen if she wishes. I mean, judges can move cases as swiftly or as slowly as they like, to be honest. Over and over again, Judge Cannon has ruled against the government as they try to keep the case moving towards trial. Just today, she ordered Special Counsel Jack Smith's team to hand over documents to Trump's lawyers that include the names of dozens of people who participated in the investigation. And here's the thing. The reason they don't want to hand them over to Trump's lawyers, Smith's office says, is because the documents also describe threats made to prospective witnesses. She told them they got to hand them over anyway. This is the dilemma we face in the era of Donald Trump as he forces a huge, constant, daily test of our entire judicial system and rule of law. Right? Trump wants it both ways. He claims all efforts to bring him to justice are a partisan attack. There's no such thing as neutral justice or equal justice. But that's aspirational. He wants to use the justice system and his supporters within it for his own partisan aims. In the case of Aileen Cannon, it looks like what it looks like when Donald Trump gets his way. Joining me now is Mark Joseph Stern, senior writer for Slate, where he covers law and the courts. Mark, I've been trying hard as a good liberal who won't take my own side in an argument, to sort of not do the thing that Trump does, right? So the Trump view is like, this is all partisan. It's Obama judges or Trump judges. It's nonsense for anyone to think that anyone is doing anything other than pure power politics when it comes to the law. And that's a really cynical and destructive way of looking at all this, right? So I'm trying to avoid that. But in the case of Cannon, like, it really does look like she is doing everything that the Trump folks want. What, is that wrong?
You know, all due respect, Chris, I think that your resistance to cynicism toward the judicial system is part of the problem. Yeah. I think that progressives across the board have a tendency, a very strong inclination to say we trust the courts, we trust the process and the rule of law, and that even Republican-appointed justices have come through on the right side. Think about after the 2020 election, all of those Trump-appointed justices tossing out the absurd election subversion claims. But what we have here is different. Judge Cannon is in a special sort of elite class of hacks appointed by Donald Trump. I would add Matthew Kacsmaryk in Texas, who recently tried to ban medication abortion nationwide. They are a new breed of Federalist Society judges that, frankly, we haven't seen before. And they are, I think, really pushing progressives toward the edge of what we can tolerate when it comes to being told you have to respect the courts. They have the last last word. Aileen Cannon is putting people's lives in danger. She is going to force Jack Smith to tell Trump who the FBI agents are who searched Mar-a-Lago. She is threatening to turn over the witness list in the Mar-a-Lago trial to the public, claiming that the public has a First Amendment right to discovery materials. I don't want to get into the federal rules of criminal procedure here, Chris, but that is just wrong. It is black letter law wrong. And the fact that she is so shamelessly pushing this nonsense suggests to me that maybe it is time for us to adopt not a Trump-like view toward the judiciary, but a very jaundiced eye towards certain judges who seem to be doing everything in their power and then some to help Trump avoid all accountability.
Okay, let's go through those two rulings. So the ruling today was basically, I read the ruling, and again, it's a little complicated because it's sort of in a bunch of, procedural language. But they're basically saying that there's an ongoing investigation into witness tampering, right? That there are witnesses who are being intimidated and threatened. And that is the reason that they can't turn this over to discovery, because they essentially don't want to, imperil that investigation / facilitate further witness intimidation, right?
Yes, that is exactly right.
And she said, sorry, you got to hand it over anyway.
Yes, she said, well, this has to be subject to the usual adversarial process with really almost no further analysis. She just said, it's disfavored for me to only take this into account and seal it and keep it from the defense. I really feel an obligation to just toss it out to the defense and let them do what they will with it, completely ignoring the fact that what Jack Smith is telling her in bright red letters is that he is afraid that the defense is facilitating witness tampering, that he is afraid that the defense is part of the problem and that it will further endanger the people on that list. Aileen Cannon does not care, and that is, again, another strike against her ability to conduct a fair trial.
I just want to read from this part about Smith's concern on this, saying that there's a well-documented pattern in which judges, agents, prosecutors, and witnesses involved in cases involving Trump have been subject to threats, harassment, and intimidation. We've been covering this in the show. It's one of the sort of defining features of what's going on right now. That apparently fell on deaf ears of Aileen Cannon. Mark Joseph Stern, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Congressman Jamie Raskin's a Democrat of Maryland who served on the January 6th committee, and he joins me now. Let me ask you that question, Congressman, that Mark just made. This sort of, at one end, sort of viewing the legal system as this sort of supremely neutral, sculpted in marble, equal opportunity, pristine institution, no fear or favor, and no politics whatsoever. And then the other sort of Trump view, which is it's all will to power, it's all power politics. How are you thinking about the courts in this moment with respect to Trump, whose own cynicism can be contagious in ways that can be dangerous, but also you have to be clear-eyed about who these judges and justices are as people and political actors?
Well, the cynical and craven will to power conception of the judges and the judiciary is, of course, a perfect projection of their own desires.
Yeah.
In the mob world that Donald Trump and his friends inhabit, it's not important what the law is. It's important who the judge is. And you don't need to know the law. You need to know the judge. And that's clearly the way that Donald Trump looks at it. So I guess I would agree with him that we must be very clear-eyed and realistic about who the judges are, where they're coming from, the Federalist Society's production of these, hacker bloggers as federal judges. These people are complete ideologues. At the same time, that going back to your original instinct, I think we do want to believe in the rule of law. I mean, part of the definition of fascism is the destruction of the rule of law. And we've seen that in every fascist society, in every authoritarian society. And that's the idea that there are certain principles that are not neutral or objective in the sense that they were divinely appointed, but they're arrived at through a process of historical and jurisprudential struggle and progress, and then they should be logically implemented and applied in particular cases. And, I was thinking as you guys were talking about how Justice Blackmun was a Richard Nixon appointee, and he wrote Roe versus Wade. It was a majority of Republican appointees that were part of Roe versus Wade. Perhaps our most liberal justice of the 20th century, William Brennan, along with Thurgood Marshall, Brennan was an Eisenhower appointee. So what we've seen is a transformation in the Republican Party. It's been turned into an authoritarian cult of personality. It's thoroughly corrupt. And what we're seeing is judges who are produced out of that cultural and political system.
You know, on that point, you've got the justices of the Supreme Court who have sort of final judicial review. We had the case yesterday about the 14th Amendment, in which they seem skeptical. And again, skeptical in very sort of earthly pragmatic terms. Very, not real sort of obsessed with history or textualism, but skeptical in earthly pragmatic terms. And then we've got, probably an immunity petition to that same court. And I guess my question is, like, what's your level of trust in that institution, which in some ways is holding, I don't want to overstate the case, but sort of holding the kind of democratic future of the nation partly in its hands?
Well, I fell out of love with the Supreme Court a long time ago. It still has a certain kind of halo from the Warren Court period where you got decisions like Miranda versus Arizona and Roe versus Wade and, Brown versus Board and so on. But that's like a very brief, momentary period in the history of the Supreme Court, which has been overwhelmingly conservative and reactionary. I mean, think about the Supreme Court all the way up to the Civil War. What did they ever do for enslaved Americans? Nothing other than in the Dred Scott decision, cement into the Constitution the idea that it's a white man's compact and that African Americans have no rights that the white man is bound to respect. And then even after the Civil War and the hard-won Reconstruction Amendments, the Supreme Court in Plessy v. Ferguson in 1896 goes ahead and constitutionalizes apartheid. Jim Crow saying that, it's totally fine to have separate transportation facilities for black and white and in other public places. So up until you get to the Warren Court and Brown versus Board, the Supreme Court did nothing. And then after about a 2-decade period, it lapses back in the Burger Court, the Rehnquist Court, the Roberts Court to that historical baseline of right-wing reaction.
But reaction is different than hackishness, though they can often be aligned. I mean, that's the sort of question here, right? Which is the degree to which the concern of basically the highest court in the land acting the way that District Judge Aileen Cannon's currently acting.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, I think that reaction, unplugged just becomes hackishness. And, anybody who signs off on the dotted line on the Federalist Society program, and now with Donald Trump, can become a federal judge, a circuit court judge, a cabinet member, what have you. And we're seeing the introduction not just of really right-wing jurisprudence, but just a collapse of logic and precedent and law. It doesn't look much like law at all. And that is what authoritarianism looks like. That's what fascism looks like. What matters is not the legal principles, but just who the identity of the parties.
Yeah. Congressman Jamie Raskin, great to have you. Thank you, sir.
You bet.
Coming up, we are just days away from the special election to replace George Santos. Remember him? Remember George Santos? And the Republican nominee has some weirdly Santos-like problems. But first, a gang of costumed vigilantes takes down a migrant shoplifter live on Fox News. Would you believe they got the wrong guy? That's next. You cannot overstate how much vile demagoguery about migrants constantly appears on Fox News day in, day out.
This is a government jobs program that lets in more migrants.
Not to mention how much we're paying for the migrants' kids to go to school.
But now the migrants are shutting down the hospitals in Denver more than COVID ever did.
We shouldn't be allowing even one migrant into the country.
Isn't this really an attempt, ultimately, to destroy the country internally?
That's exactly what it is.
It's poisonous stuff, and Fox News executives don't seem to care if what they're saying is true, as quite famously demonstrated when they paid out a 9-figure settlement to Dominion voting machines. And when they defended a now former primetime host from a slander lawsuit by just telling the court his Fox News show did not really do news, so he couldn't be guilty of defamation. Which brings us to what happened the other night. Fox News host Sean Hannity tried to get some synergy with another brand you might remember from the 80s, the Guardian Angels and their vigilante founder, Curtis Sliwa. Do you remember him? His gang was going to make the streets safe for regular people by rooting out criminals, as he told the Today Show back in 1982.
Because the criminal is very violent and operates in what we call the wolf packs. You see them by the way they dress, their style, almost like modern-day pirates, and that's what keeps you in fear. Once they've smelled fear from you, once they've seen you change your path of entry or to cross the street from where they're hanging out, they descend upon you like wolves.
Oh, my God, like a time warp to my childhood in the Bronx. Fast forward to Tuesday night when Hannity interviewed Curtis Sliwa live in Times Square, about 40 years older, back in his costume like the Kiss reunion tour, talking about the hellscape that is New York under the migrant invasion. And they had a remarkable Fox TV moment.
If you divide 53 million by 500, that's a $106,000 debit card. Not a bad deal. I don't think they're giving them to vets that are homeless in New York City. Not that I've heard, Curtis.
Well, in fact, our guys have just taken down one of the migrant guys right here on the corner, 42nd and 7th. While all this
Can you
is
pan the camera?
They've taken over. They've taken over. You'd like the camera over there if at all possible.
Yep. You got your key open, guys.
He is out of control. Out of control. They had been shoplifting first. The Guardian Angels spotted them, stopped them. He resisted. And let's just say we gave him a little pain compliance. His mother back in Venezuela felt the vibrations. He's sucking concrete.
What a despicable exhibition. So Sliwa says the man they were assaulting was a migrant shoplifter, the one that was sucking at concrete. A perfect story for that Donald Trump and Fox News are telling their audience about the illegals and the rampant crime, except, guess what? After the cameras turned off, a little more reporting and digging revealed that the man Sliwa's gang wrestled down was not a migrant, but, drumroll, a New Yorker from the Bronx. And while Sliwa claimed he was a shoplifter, there was no evidence of that, and he was not charged with shoplifting by the police. He was issued a disorderly conduct summons, apparently for being disruptive during Curtis's live shot. In other words, a New Yorker in the middle of Times Square was interrupting a live shot of Curtis Sliwa, and his goons assaulted him. Yesterday, Fox once again had to do some cleanup to avoid another lawsuit.
Now, Curtis said that the man was a migrant and that he was shoplifting. Fox News has since spoken to the NYPD. Apparently, the statements made by Curtis that the man is a migrant is not true. Curtis said, in part, quote, "I shouldn't have been listening to the crowd. That was my mistake. I should not have had that knee-jerk reaction." Again, on this show, we always want to set the record straight.
Oh, they sure do. Some good advice there, life advice generally for folks. I shouldn't have been listening to the crowd and shouldn't have had the knee-jerk reaction. You know, in America, there is a real issue we have right now with migration flows at the southern border, both in terms of what danger and uncertainty it presents for the people that are showing up there, and also the sort of strain it puts on various social systems here in New York and Denver and Chicago and a whole bunch of other places. It is a real thing, and there's lots of folks working very hard to deal with it. And then there's the disgusting garbage that is being pumped out by Fox and other parts of the Rupert Murdoch empire, like the New York Post. Just the vilest, most dehumanizing, disgusting filth you can imagine. Do you remember the nationwide shoplifting panic that turned out to be completely belied by the statistics? Or the splashy stories of a migrant caravan apocalypse that never came? Please, remember those every time you hear a viral story in a city that, by the way, where crime has dropped significantly last year during the migrant surge. When you hear one of those viral stories, I am urging everyone, in the words of Curtis Sliwa, don't have a knee-jerk reaction. Wait for a bit for the truth to emerge. One of the most watched special elections in a long time is going to take place in New York on Tuesday. It is a congressional district that Biden won by double digits in 2020. Then it got redistricted, and a heretofore obscure gentleman named George Santos won the new district as a Republican in 2022 by nearly 8 points. Now, after Santos' ignominious flameout and expulsion from Congress, well, they got to have a special election to replace him. And this election pits the guy who used to represent the old district in Congress, Tom Suozzi, who's a staunchly centrist Democrat, against a relative newcomer, Mazi Pilip, who is a county legislator. Despite the fact that George Santos managed to escape vetting and get elected, to the great embarrassment, really, of everyone, Pilip's financial disclosures in the race have raised questions, and she has not been particularly clear or detailed about, like, what her political positions are. Last night, at the only debate in this election, here's what she had to say when the candidates were asked about abortion.
It is a personal decision, a personal choice. So every woman should have that choice. I'm not going to tell her what to do. And I made it so clear. It's so personal to me.
So you're pro-choice?
Again, this is a personal choice. Every woman will make that decision. You have been lying to the public. Now you have the opportunity to fix it. Go ahead.
I'm asking you very clearly. Are you pro-choice?
I made it again. It's a personal decision.
Just say you're pro-choice.
Mazi Pilip, I am pro-life. This is me.
Okay.
Marissa Kabas is an MSNBC columnist, author of the Handbasket newsletter, which I recommend. She's our go-to reporter on the George Santos scandals. She's been closely following the race to replace him. Marissa, welcome.
Thank you.
I mean, so here's my understanding of the dynamic here. That this is a district that's probably 65-35 pro-choice, pro-Roe v. Wade at least, right?
Yes.
Pilip understands that. Am I right? It seems like she is literally saying, I am pro-life and I am pro-choice as her position on abortion.
Well, she just doesn't want to say the actual words, I am pro-choice, because that could haunt her forever in the Republican Party. And she's trying to skirt the line a little bit. And so she doesn't want that soundbite. But
I see. That's what it's about. It's about for her future.
Yes. Oh, she has aspirations. She wants to go places, and this is her first stepping stone.
Right. So she's doing this thing, which this is now the sort of cutting edge of Republican messaging. I am pro-life, and every woman should get to choose if they have an abortion. Right? This is sort of what she's saying?
Yes. She's a mother of 7, so she doesn't want to alienate religious voters or people with a lot of children. And so she's sort of like playing both sides. She's like, you can choose whatever you want to do. And she doesn't support a national abortion ban. She says that. She says.
I mean, we'll see. One of the things that I think is the context here for why this race is going to be so heavily watched is that there's a very thin majority in a Republican Congress. Have you seen anything from her that would indicate that this is not a person who's basically going to end up empowering a Republican majority if that's how she's elected?
I don't think she's going to be any sort of stalwart or any sort of, big change maker. She's not going to make a splash. I think she's going to go in there and just go along with the party line because that's what Santos did and that's what they need. And I'm sure she's been telegraphed that message.
This is an interesting district. The latest polling had Suozzi up by 4, but I think I've talked to a lot of people in this district. They think it's they literally think it's going to be like 500 votes. They think it's like multiple people said it's the closest race I've worked on. And one of the things that's been very striking to me is that the sort of migrant border issue is playing enormously in the district.
Yeah, you would think that the district was on the Texas border based on how much they're talking about it. They did a candidate forum a couple of weeks ago on a local news station, and if I took a shot every time she said border, I would be dead by now. I mean, it was crazy. And it just seems like she's just hitting it, and hoping that that's what sticks. It's sort of the tough on crime thing that we did in 2022 that got a lot of Republican votes, and that brought us Santos sort of in that red wave.
It seems to me like there's been a little bit of a crossfade between, what you saw in New York was New York Republicans overperformed the National Party. They won 5 or 6 seats that people didn't necessarily expect. It happened in the sort of New York Post ambit. I mean, really, where the Murdoch empire was just flogging the crime issue. Is it still crime, or has it been? It seems to me like they've sort of switched from crime to migrants.
It's migrant crime.
Right. Oh, yes. The perfect. That's right. Yes, that's the perfect.
Yeah. As you were talking about before, I mean, with this Curtis Sliwa video and trying to make it seem like these illegal criminals are overrunning our borders, that's the message that she's trying to get through. It's not that immigrants are bad. It's that these dangerous immigrants are bad. And she complained about a playground being near a migrant shelter in the district.
It seems to me, too, Suozzi is a sort of very known quantity. He represented the district. He left to go run and challenge Kathy Hochul for governor in the primary from her right. I mean, he was the conservative Democrat. He is a conservative Democrat for sure. Which is more in line with that district. That is not a district that's going to elect AOC. I just don't get a sense. She doesn't do a lot of events. I just don't get a sense of what her politics are, really.
Well, she's from Israel. And we're in the midst of this very pivotal time about Israel. And I think it was a really cynical gambit by the local Republican Party. He said, oh, we have an Israeli ex-soldier who could kind of step up for the special election. We have no time to figure this out. And so they just thought voters would say, oh, Israel, yay, amazing. Let's go for it.
And obviously it's a very pro-Israel district in terms of the politics.
Very much so, but there's no daylight between her and Suozzi on Israel.
Right. And it seems like Suozzi is also trying to make sure there's not much daylight on immigrants either. I mean, he's really he's sort of running on the right on those two topics.
Absolutely. There's this much separating them. They're very similar.
It's going to be very interesting. Marissa Kabas, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Coming up, President Biden today called the lack of congressional support for Ukraine criminal neglect. So why are House Republicans still running cover for Vladimir Putin? Tommy Vitor on the MAGA madness ahead. Last night, after President Joe Biden gave remarks in the diplomatic reception room regarding the newly released special counsel report, then he made a point of returning to the lectern to give his sharpest public criticism yet of the Israeli war in Gaza.
I'm of the view, as you know, that the conduct of the response in the Gaza Strip has been over the top. I've been pushing really hard to get humanitarian assistance into Gaza. There are a lot of innocent people who are starving, a lot of innocent people who are in trouble and dying, and it's got to stop.
The war has killed nearly 28,000 Palestinians, according to local health authorities, more than 11,000 of them children. A little more than 12 hours after that rebuke, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered his military to prepare a plan to evacuate Palestinians from Rafah ahead of an expected invasion. Now, Rafah is a southern city where 1.3 million Palestinians have fled to, directed there by Israel, because it's the only semi-safe place as Israeli ground forces have worked their way through the territory from the north down to the south. And so the question is now, where are all those people supposed to go? Just a few hours before Biden's comments, in fact, an Israeli airstrike killed 13 people, including 5 children in Rafah, and NBC News camera crew was on the scene and captured some of that footage. The issue of Biden publicly rebuking the war and Netanyahu doubling down in response illustrates one of the fundamental problems here, the fundamental problem. Joe Biden seems to understand that every day the war goes on is bad, both for the U.S. and its national interests and for him politically. A recent NBC News poll found that just 29% of registered voters approve of how he's handling the war in Gaza, 60% disapproving. An Economist YouGov poll found 49% of 18 to 29-year-olds believe Israel's committing genocide against Palestinian civilians, as do a full half of Biden's own 2020 voters. And of course, there are many Democrats who are staunchly pro-Israel, want to see the war continue, want Biden to support him even more. And it's threatening to fracture the Democratic coalition because the coalition is divided on this issue. Yesterday, the Biden campaign sent emissaries to Dearborn, Michigan, which is a huge Arab population, which turned into a contentious meeting as protesters demonstrated outside. So this is an acute political problem for Joe Biden, the president. Not to mention the fact that every day the war goes on, there is more death and destruction, more risk of starvation, and crucially also less chance the Israeli hostages come home, not to mention more risks for American troops in the region day by day. So Biden has every incentive for this to come to a close. Benjamin Netanyahu, on the other hand, has essentially the opposite incentives. Just about everyone in Israeli politics, and most Israeli voters, agree that he is responsible for overseeing the worst security breach in the country's history during the October 7th massacre by Hamas, and that he must be held to account. But any reckoning will be postponed while the country pursues this war under a current unity government, meaning this: every day the war goes on is another day of political survival for Netanyahu, forestalling the day of reckoning. Just this week, he rejected the terms of a ceasefire the U.S. had worked on with the Qataris and others, saying the only solution was, quote, absolute victory. Now, an impending assault on Rafah, and President Joe Biden has tied himself politically to a man who not only does not want to see Joe Biden reelected necessarily, his views are considerably closer to Donald Trump, but Israel's a sovereign nation. It can make decisions about their own war management and what they feel is necessary for the defense. Right now, Joe Biden is abetting a man in Netanyahu whose own political survival makes Biden's political standing worse by the day. Something's got to give. The Senate voted to proceed on a bill that includes aid to Israel and Ukraine yesterday, leaving aside all the border stuff, which went up in flames. There's no guarantee it will pass the chamber, and even if it does, the big question would be if it can pass the House, where Republicans, of course, hold that razor-thin majority. The House Republican caucus is wholly under the sway of Donald Trump, a man who was elected president on the back of criminal sabotage pulled off by Vladimir Putin. A man who tried to blackmail the current Ukrainian president into concocting an investigation in an attempt to sink Joe Biden's campaign and help Trump get reelected. He is a man who has every incentive to help the Kremlin and holds most elected Republicans under his thumb. Meanwhile, Ukraine is literally running out of ammunition and facing a war effort that appears to have completely stalled out and may even be going in reverse. Now, the fate of that country is essentially in the hands of a Republican Party that, you know, is under the sway of Putin's most valuable asset. Tommy Vitor served as spokesperson for President Obama and the National Security Council. He's now the co-host of Pod Save the World and Pod Save America, and he joins me now. Tommy, the politics here are fascinating. You just sort of walk us through what they are. The Senate managed to pass this. Where do things stand right now?
I mean, it sounds like they're working through the weekend, Chris, and, you know, hopefully they'll get some sort of package through, but then you have to decide what's going to happen in the House. And Speaker Johnson knows that he's got a big part of his caucus, the kind of MAGA wing and the MAGA wing of the House of Representatives, that just does not support Ukraine funding because, for whatever reason, Donald Trump hates Ukraine. So it sounds like it's dead on arrival. So Ukraine is in an incredibly precarious place. Like you said, you have them losing battles and retreating from territory because they are literally running out of shells.
Yeah, and just to be clear here, right? I mean, like, there's probably 320 votes in the House, you know, out of 434 at this point, 435 for a Ukraine-Israel funding bill, right? I mean, there's probably a super majority if it could get to the floor, but if Mike Johnson brings it to the floor, like, he might be toast.
That's exactly right. I mean, the fate of Ukraine's future is being held up by the narrowest slice of Republican politics. You have Mike Johnson worried about whether he loses his speakership, so he won't bring it for a vote. And then you have the Republicans in the Senate who delayed 4 months because they said they wanted to couple Ukraine and Israel funding with an immigration reform bill, did it, got everything they wanted, and then walked away from it for purely political reasons. So, like, people are dying because of these political, you know, accommodations we're making.
Yeah, that's an important point to stick with here, which is the timing of all this. Obviously, Ukraine's needed this funding. I mean, we are their main sort of supplier, and people know, you know, you've read American history, you know how important French support for the U.S. Revolution was, how important British support not supporting the Confederates was in the Civil War. Like, this is a recurring theme throughout history, right? Like, being able to have access to foreign support, particularly in arms and money, it matters a lot. And 4 months of that was burned up by these border negotiations to produce a bill they killed before it came out.
Yes. To produce a bill that one of the Republicans authors of it, James Langford, walked away from before he could even get a vote. And to your point, I mean, look, the European Union stepped up and they recently passed about 50 billion euros worth of funding that I think gets Ukraine through 2027. But the European Union just does not have the capacity that we have to produce weapons, to produce shells, to provide the kind of aid that Ukraine needs. So if they don't get this $60 billion from the U.S., it's existential. And again, I think reasonable people can disagree on the policy itself, but to dither for 4 months to write this immigration bill and then walk away from it because Donald Trump got mad and thought it might help Joe Biden is truly unconscionable.
This is what Joe Biden, who was meeting with the German chancellor today, had to say about the prospect of failure to pass the supplemental. Take a listen.
I'd like to add another point. The failure of the United States Congress, if it occurs, not to support Ukraine is close to criminal neglect. It is outrageous.
And I got to say, like, it's one thing if if there's this sort of grassroots policy debate happening, but what it really feels like is they're going to cut funding off of this country that's fighting for its very life because of this narrow slice of like 30 members of a Republican caucus that are devoted to Trump, MAGA, and Putin.
Yeah. Can you imagine you're sitting on the front lines of Ukraine and you are running out of shells? And the reason why is because like Marjorie Taylor Greene decided to do a Fox News hit and get mad about Ukraine funding. I mean, it is the most ridiculous rationale I've ever heard. But that is American politics these days. This tiny slice, this MAGA wing of the Republican Party runs the entire GOP now.
And you can see Putin has sensed this weakness and gave an interview in which he was very sort of, let's negotiate. It wasn't the sort of all the bombast, we're going to nuke you back to the Stone Age. It was a very like, hey, gentlemen, let's sit down and figure this out, because I think he senses that this pause, again, the sort of MAGA wing of the Republican Party under Donald Trump gives him leverage for the most favorable outcome in negotiations.
That's exactly right. He went to Tucker Carlson because he knows he's an influential figure in the Republican circles. He can help kill the supplemental bill and then long term help get Donald Trump elected. Though, I mean, look, I haven't listened to the entire 2-hour interview between Putin and Tucker, but I've read about it. And I think one takeaway from the interview is he begins with this like 30-minute diatribe about history and how Ukraine is historically Russian territory and he wants all of it. And I think we should believe him. You know, we can negotiate some sort of settlement where Ukraine is forced to give away 20% of its territory or Crimea or whatever, but no one should think for a second that Putin is going to stop there. Certainly the Balkan countries don't, other NATO countries don't. They're all worried that Putin will storm through all of Ukraine and not stop there and continue westward. So, I mean, this is very disconcerting for everyone in Europe and people in the United States who would like to see peace in Europe.
Yeah, I mean, his defenders have said that this was all provoked by NATO's expansion, and he spent 45 minutes being like, if you go back to the 9th century, the cradle of our civilization actually is in Kyiv, and it belongs to us. Taimi Vitor, thank you very much.
Yeah.
That does it for All In. You can catch us every weeknight at 8 o'clock on MSNBC. Don't forget to like us on Facebook. That's facebook.com/allinwithchris.